The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence. It was the breathing. It came in slow, uneven pulls, as though someone hidden in the shadows was struggling to draw air through a narrow throat. At first, I thought it was mine. The marble corridors of the museum had a way of throwing sound back at you, reshaping it into something unfamiliar. But when I held my breath, the sound continued, rasping, shallow, too close. The air was thick, almost metallic, like old coins clutched in a sweating palm. I could smell dust baked into the wooden display cases, varnish still holding on to the faintest tang of chemicals. Somewhere deeper in the building, the hum of failing light fixtures stuttered, flicker, 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 a rhythm that set my teeth on edge. Shadows crawled across the high vaulted ceiling, stretching unnaturally with every faltering bulb. I told myself this was nothing, just nerves. First night on the job. But when I turned down the east wing, the air dropped 10 degrees colder. My breath fogged against the glass of sealed exhibit case, and that's when I saw it, movement. A blur, darting across the reflection. Something inside. I froze. That gallery hadn't been opened in decades. The case before me displayed a collection of early 19th century masks, their painted eyes fixed forward, frozen smiles cracked with age. None of them should have moved. And yet one was tilted, its painted lips wider, as if laughing silently at my hesitation. The breathing grew louder, synchronized with the flicker of the failing light. Step by step, I raised my flashlight, my hand trembling so violently the beam jeered across stone and glass like a nervous heartbeat. For an instant, I thought I caught a face pressed against the inside of the case. Not painted, not carved, pale, watching. I blinked and it was gone. Still, the glass held fresh condensation, as though something inside had just exhaled. People think being a curator is romantic. Dusty books, priceless artifacts, the quiet dignity of history whispering through stone halls. They never see the nights. They never see the isolation, the endless silence pressing in, or the responsibility that feels heavier than any object I've ever carried. I had just been hired by the city museum, a place once prestigious but now forgotten by most. Budget cuts had stripped it bare, and the older staff treated the archives like a burden instead of a treasure. Still, for me, it was an opportunity. I had studied art history and archival science for years, dreaming of nights spent among relics, caring for objects that had survived centuries. When they told me I'd be alone on my first night, monitoring, cataloging, and ensuring security, I told myself it was a privilege. But privilege feels different when the building swallows you whole. The museum was massive, a labyrinth of corridors and shuttered wings. Most of the exhibits were locked, many tagged with warnings that had nothing to do with structural safety. Do not open. Restricted. Private collection. The older staff smirked whenever I asked about them, as though I'd understand soon enough. I wanted to prove myself, to show I wasn't just another graduate desperate for a paycheck. My father used to say, if you take responsibility for the past, you carry it forever. I didn't know how literal those words would become. That first night, I sat in the security office, staring at a wall of monitors. Grainy cameras showed empty halls, glass cases, dim-lit corridors that looked more like tombs and galleries. I should have felt safe, insulated by technology, but the cameras made me feel exposed. Every flicker of static, every shadow slipping across the grain, it felt like something watching back. As I walked my rounds, I began noticing small details I couldn't ignore. The temperature dropped dramatically near certain exhibits, particularly those without records. Tags were smudged or rewritten, dates scratched out, provenance unclear. One case in the East Wing contained a leather-bound book, so worn the cover peeled away like old skin. Its label only read, Unverified Acquisition, 1974. The year struck me. That was the same year the Egyptian gallery had been sealed. I thought it coincidence. At least I told myself it was. The deeper I went, the more the building resisted me. Doors stuck when I tried to open them, then swung wide with no explanation. My footsteps echoed long after I stopped walking, as though another set of shoes was following just behind. And the smell, damp stone mixed with something sharp metallic, like iron shavings or dry blood. I told myself it was rust from old pipes. But when I leaned in, the scent clung to my clothes. I kept remembering the breathing from earlier, The way the glass fogged when I knew no one was inside. My rational mind screamed fatigue, overactive imagination. Yet deep down, something older stirred, a fear I'd carried since childhood. The fear of being trapped with something ancient, something nameless, and being the one responsible for it. Because if anything went wrong in these halls, if something was disturbed, it wouldn't just be history that was broken. It would be me. And then came the knock. Soft, deliberate, echoing through the east wing. 3 sharp raps against wood. When I checked the staff log, my stomach turned cold. The gallery it came from had been sealed since 1974. The knock echoed so clearly that I thought someone had broken in. My training told me to secure the area, to document anything suspicious, to treat the objects inside not as myths, but as evidence of culture, of history. But training does little when the hairs on your arms rise, and the air feels like it has teeth. I made my way toward the east wing, my flashlight jittering across stone walls. Each step seemed to stretch longer than the last, as if the hallway were breathing me in. The knock didn't repeat, but the silence that followed pressed against my skull like static. When I reached the gallery door, I hesitated. The record said it was sealed, and yet the wood bore fresh marks. Faint indentations like fingertips had pressed into it from the other side. I tried the handle, locked. Still, I leaned close, ear against the wood. That's when I heard it, whispering. Not words, not really. Just a cadence of human voices layered over each other, murmuring like water running beneath stone. I pulled back fast, pulse hammering. My rational mind clawed for explanations, drafts through cracks, old ventilation, echoes. But my body knew better. My body told me there was someone or something inside. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own feet, and caught myself on the wall. My palm pressed against cold stone, damp and slick, as though the building itself was sweating. The thought lodged itself like a splinter. The museum was alive, and I was walking through its veins. Mini cliffhanger. The lights in the hall went out one by one until only my flashlight remained. I fled back to the security office, convincing myself I needed evidence. If I could find an explanation in the archives, maybe I'd regain control. The monitors crackled as I entered, screens flickering from static to black, then back again. One camera feed showed a hallway I knew had no cameras installed. In it, a figure moved, a tall silhouette, dressed in the curator's coat identical to mine. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and the feed dissolved into static. Forcing myself to sit, I pulled the acquisition records from the filing cabinet. My hand shook as I flipped through brittle paper, catalog numbers, accession forms. Most items were neatly logged. Clay tablets, oil paintings, broken fragments of pottery. But every few pages, I found gaps, entries half-filled, signatures cut short, notes written in a different hand entirely. One in particular caught me. If you hear them breathing, never look. It was written on the margin of a shipping manifest dated 1952. No signature, no initials, just a warning. I tried to swallow, throat dry as parchment. The deeper I dug, the more the records dissolved into madness. Sketches of symbols instead of dates, stains that looked too much like blood to be ink. One ledger ended mid-sentence. Tonight, it reached the glass, and then nothing. I closed the book, heart racing, sweat sticking my shirt to my back. For a moment, I thought I smelled smoke, faint and acrid. But when I looked around, the air was clear. The knock came again. This time not from the east wing, from directly behind me. I turned slowly, every bone in my body screaming not to. The office was empty, except for the reflection in the monitor, where a face hovered behind mine. I abandoned the office. I couldn't sit surrounded by those screens any longer. Couldn't watch myself being watched. I took the long corridor back toward the main gallery, flashlight beam bouncing across marble, catching the glass cases lined with artifacts. That's when I noticed the masks. They were part of a traveling exhibit. Folk masked from different cultures. I'd passed them earlier, but now something was wrong. Their faces seemed altered, mouths opened wider, painted eyes darker, holes cut deeper. As I walked, their gazes followed. No matter how I angled the beam, every mask appeared to tilt toward me. I forced myself closer to one case, trying to prove I was imagining things. The glass was smeared with condensation. On the inside, and drawn into it were shapes, childlike handprints pressed against the glass, as though something inside had been trying to get out. I stumbled back, bumping into another case. A thud answered, as if something inside had knocked in return. I ran then, breath ragged, shoes slapping against stone. The corridor twisted, longer than I remembered, the exit further and further away. Shadows crawled along the ceiling, stretching, bending like limbs reaching down to touch me. When I finally stopped, gasping, I was no longer where I thought I'd be. Somehow, the museum had shifted. The signs above the doors bore no familiar labels. Instead, in faded paint they read, Curator's Wing. But there was no such wing on the maps, no such place in the records. I pushed open the nearest door. Inside were rows of display cases, but instead of artifacts, they contained uniforms. Curator coats, just like mine. Some pristine, some shredded, stained dark with age. On one case, the glass was cracked and the coat inside was missing. My knees went weak, because I had seen that coat before, on the security feed, and it was still warm when I reached out to touch the empty hanger. That's when I realized I wasn't the first to be trapped here. And what I saw next still keeps me awake at night. I should have left. Every instinct in my body screamed for the exit. Yet some part of me, stubborn, professional, terrified of failure, kept me walking deeper into the building. A curator is meant to preserve history, not abandon it, no matter how much it claws at your sanity. That thought became my chain. The curator's wing bled into another corridor I didn't recognize. The air was heavier here, carrying a strange sweetness beneath the dust, like decaying flowers sealed in a coffin. My flashlight wavered across crates stacked along the walls, each stamped with faded accession numbers. None of them appeared in our database. I chose one crate at random, heart pounding, and pried it open with a crowbar hanging nearby. The wood groaned, splintering under my grip, releasing a stale gust of air so cold it made my teeth ache. Inside was no pottery, no manuscript. Instead, a sarcophagus, small enough to fit a child, lined with gold leaf, so tarnished it resembled rotting flesh. It shouldn't have been here. Egyptian artifacts are tracked with obsessive precision, every fragment accounted for in international records. But this one had no entry, no provenance, no paper trail at all. And that meant one of two things. It was either stolen or it had been hidden deliberately. I should have logged it, taken photographs, filed a preliminary note. That was my duty. But the moment I leaned closer, duty felt meaningless, because the lid shuddered. At first, I told myself it was my imagination, that my trembling hands had nudged it. Then it moved again, slow, deliberate, as though something inside was pressing upward. The air turned sharp metallic, like inhaling a mouthful of blood. My vision blurred the edges as I stumbled back, but I couldn't look away. Cracks spread along the seam of the lid, wood and stone grinding against each other, until a gap opened wide enough to see inside. And then a hand slipped through. Not a skeletal hand, not even mummified. Its skin was waxy, pale, like flesh preserved in chemicals too long. Fingers flexed, nails scraping against the crate's interior. The smell that poured out with it, sweet rot, embalming oils, the acrid sting of something chemical, hit me so hard I gagged. I wanted to run, to scream, but another thought cut to the panic. If this artifact was undocumented, it meant no one knew it existed. No one except me. If I fled, if I destroyed it, history itself could be lost. That was the curse of being a curator. Even in the face of horror, part of me cared about preservation, about record, about leaving proof. The hand clawed upward, grasping for light, and I forced myself closer. I had to know if it was human remains, some twisted preservation experiment. I had to know if history had been rewritten and buried in front of me. But when the fingers wrapped around the edge, I saw it. They weren't shriveled with age. They were fresh, too fresh. Tiny veins pulsed beneath the translucent skin. The lid shifted wider. A face pushed through. Its eyes were sewn shut. The mouth, too, stitched crudely with thick, dark thread. But the flesh twitched, straining against the seams as muffled gasps forced their way out, wet, desperate, suffocating. The sound of someone trying to breathe through a mouth that no longer opened. I stumbled back, hitting another crate. It toppled, crashing to the floor. The noise seemed to rattle the walls themselves. From inside the sarcophagus came a muffled scream, more vibration than sound, tearing through the stitches until dark liquid trickled down its chin. The hand shot forward, seizing my wrist. The grip was inhumanly strong, cold and slick, as though embalming fluid seeped through its pores. My bones ground together under the pressure, and I dropped my flashlight. The beam spun wildly, strobing across the walls until it landed on something that froze my blood even more. Other crates, all of them trembling. One by one, lids rattled, seemed splitting, with creaking as though something inside each container was stirring. My mind shattered between two truths: that I was the only living soul in the wing, and that I wasn't alone at all. I yanked my arm free, skin tearing where its nails dug in. My blood smeared across the crate, a fresh stain on something already too ancient. The figure inside writhed harder, muffled shrieks vibrating through the room. And all around me, the chorus of knocks began, fists pounding from inside boxes, with cracking nails screeching against stone. I ran for the exit, lungs on fire, dragging myself toward the door. My flashlight beam sliced through the darkness just long enough to catch the corridor beyond. For a moment, I thought I was free, but the exit wasn't where it should have been. Instead, the corridor looped back into the gallery itself. I skidded to a halt, heart hammering, realizing with dread that the museum had folded me inward. I was trapped inside its maze. And behind me, the crates were opening. The pounding stopped all at once, replaced by a single sound that rose through the air, low and steady, crawling into my bones. Breathing, dozens of voices breathing in unison. And then in the silence between a whisper, Curator. The crates stopped pounding, but the silence that followed was worse. Silence like the breath had been sucked out of the air, leaving only the pressure of unseen lungs inflating, exhaling, inhaling all around me. My ears strained, heart racing, and then came the word again, whispered not by one voice, but by dozens overlapping in a ragged chorus. Curator. It slithered to the hall like smoke, curling under my skin. My flashlight flickered, beams swinging across the sarcophagus, the crates, the floor slick with dust and my own smeared blood. And then every lid split open at once. The sound was unbearable, splintering wood, snapping nails, embalmed cloth tearing free. Figures pulled themselves upright in broken unison, waxen hands gripping edges. Stitched faces straining, as if desperate to scream. Some wore ceremonial wrappings, others were bare, skin bloated with preservation chemicals that wept through the seams. None should have been moving, yet they did, spasming, jerking forward like puppets tugged on invisible strings. I stumbled backward while rising, the air stinking of rot and formaldehyde, copper and mold. My lungs burned, but worse was the recognition clawing through my thoughts. These weren't just artifacts. These were acquisitions. They'd been cataloged, sealed, forgotten, hidden because no institution would dare admit to holding them. I'd read enough in the ledgers to know. Somewhere, sometime, a curator before me had signed off on each of these boxes. Just like me, they had chosen preserve. And now their decisions were standing in front of me, alive. They shuffled closer, stitched mouths jerking, breaths whistling through broken threads. I wanted to run, but my legs locked. This wasn't just horror, it was judgment. The air quaked with the low groan of the museum's foundations. The lights above burst one after another, glass raining down, sparks hissing. In the strobe of failing electricity, I saw the walls ripple. The marble wasn't solid anymore. It flexed, as though it was the skin of something massive that surrounded me. Each corridor, each sealed gallery, just ribs and a colossal body. I ran then, slipping on shards, ignoring the cuts along my hands and knees. The figures reached out, fingers grazing my coat. One caught the fabric, and when I tore free, a strip of the museum's uniform came away in its grip. The stitched head tilted, and for the first time, a muffled laugh pushed through. I barreled through door after door, but the museum folded me back inward each time. I'd studied these halls for weeks before taking the job, memorized maps, walked tours, but now corridors bent like melted wax. Stairs twisted, looping into themselves. No matter which direction I chose, I returned to the same gallery, the curator's wing. The display cases loomed around me. Inside each one, Curator uniform swayed gently as though in a wind I couldn't feel. My flashlight beam froze on a cracked case at the end of the row. Behind the glass hung a coat identical to mine, but darker, soaked in stains that gleamed under the light. The placard below read my name. I staggered back, chest tightening. My name, my start date, tonight's date. A scraping echoed behind me. I turned and froze. They had followed, dozens of them. Stitched faces glistening with fluid, hands dragging along stone. But there were others too. Shadows darker than shadow, tall and thin, clothed not in wrappings but in the same coats I'd seen displayed. The past curators. Their eyes were pits of ink, their mouths sewn shut like the others. One lifted a trembling hand and pointed directly at me. Another mirrored the motion. Soon, all of them pointed. A silent jury. No, I whispered, voice breaking. I'm not like you. I keep records. I preserve. But even as I said it, I remember my hesitation earlier. The split second where I considered leaving the sarcophagus unrecorded, untouched. Preservation had felt irrelevant then. And maybe that was my test. The floor shuddered, splitting with a crack that echoed through the chamber. From the Fisher Rose shelves, towering stacks of ledgers, logs, manifests. They leaned toward me, pages flipping on their own, sheets bleeding with ink that dripped like fresh wounds. Each page bore signatures, names of curators long gone, their entries ending abruptly with smudges, claw marks, stains. One ledger opened at my feet. The page was blank. A pen lay across it, ink fresh. They wanted me to sign. No, I gasped, stumbling back. I won't. The stitched figures surged closer, their muffled groans rattling in my skull. My flashlight guttered and died, leaving me in darkness except for the pale glow of the open page. The air pressed in, suffocating, heavy with centuries of breath that wasn't mine. The figures encircled me, their hands reaching, their fingers brushing my skin. One leaned so close I felt its stitched lips graze my ear. The thread shifted, straining, and then broke with a wet snap. A single word hissed out, damp and foul with decay. Right. I dropped to my knees, pen shaking in my grip. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. My wrist trembled above the paper. If I signed, I knew it wouldn't just be ink. It would be my place in their chain, my life preserved alongside theirs. But if I refused, what then? Could I survive the touch of their endless hands? Could I withstand the weight of their unfinished breaths? Tears burned down my cheeks. I thought of my father's words of responsibility. If you take responsibility for the past, you carry it forever. Was this what he meant? My hand lowered, tip of the pen hovering above the blank line. The paper pulsed, rising like skin beneath a heartbeat. A drop of my sweat, or was it blood, spattered onto the sheet, sinking into the fibers. The figures fell silent, waiting, and then movement in the glass case behind me. I turned slowly. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't mimicking me. Its mouth wasn't stitched. Its lips curved into a wide, knowing smile. And then, impossibly, it raised a pen in its own hand, scribbling across the ledger inside the glass. I looked down, the page in front of me filled with writing, letters spilling across a line in my own handwriting. I hadn't moved. The reflection looked up, still smiling, and mouthed a word I couldn't hear. My skin crawled as the stitched figures bent forward, bowing in unison. The museum groaned with satisfaction, as though something deep within its bones had finally fed. I dropped the pen, scrambling back toward the door. Pages ripped themselves from ledgers, fluttering like black wings around me. The stitched mouth screamed without sound, a hurricane of breath slamming against my chest. I shoved the door with all my weight, with cracking beneath my shoulder. And as I stumbled through, gasping, the reflection in the glass didn't follow. It stayed behind, waving. But the ledger page clung to my palm, ink still wet, and my name was signed at the bottom. I don't remember how I made it out of the curator's wing. One moment I was clawing through the warped corridors, ledger pages slapping against my skin like leeches. The next I was slumped on the museum's marble steps outside, the night air cutting through me like ice water. The city beyond was ordinary, traffic lights blinking, buses wheezing by, people scrolling their phones. No one saw the blood on my sleeves. No one noticed the paper still clutched in my hand, curling like flesh around my fingers. I tried to throw it away, but the ink bled through, staining my palm in strokes that resembled my own handwriting. I told myself I was in shock. That exhaustion, the hours, maybe even the stress of my first night, had broken me. That's what I repeated when the director called the next morning, asking why I hadn't finished my cataloging notes. My voice shook as I lied, saying I'd locked up early, that nothing unusual had happened, but unusual followed me. For weeks, every attempt I made to continue my work went wrong. The computer corrupted files. Photographs blurred, no matter how steady my hands. The accession numbers I typed into the database reversed themselves, rearranging into dates. Dates that matched the death certificates of curators from the museum's archives. When I tried to show a colleague, the errors corrected themselves in front of him. "You're just tired," he said kindly. But when he walked away, the screen flickered. The same blank page appeared, the one with the waiting line. And always, out of the corner of my eye, the reflection in glass cases smiled. I began avoiding mirrors, avoiding polished surfaces. Even polished bronze plaques or the glare of display glass could betray me. The figure was always there, writing, recording something I couldn't stop. Some nights, when I stayed too late, the sound of scratching pens echoed down the empty galleries. My stomach curdled each time, because I knew the sound wasn't coming from my hand, but somewhere else, just near enough for me to hear. I tried to burn the ledger page once. In the alley behind my apartment, I lit a match and pressed it to the paper. It curled, darkened, shriveled. I thought I'd finally freed myself, until I woke the next morning with the page neatly folded on my desk, cleaner than before, as if it had never touched flame. That was the first time I cried, not out of fear, but because I understood you don't destroy a record, you preserve it. That was a lesson carved into me now. The toll spread further. Sleep turned to a shallow doze broken by whispers. I stopped visiting my family, afraid they'd see the stains on my hands I couldn't scrub off. At work, I felt the weight of every artifact differently: bones, manuscripts, reliquaries. All of them pulsed with the same question: will you preserve me or will you bury me? I don't know which answer is worse. And yet, here's the strangest part. The museum didn't collapse that night. No bodies were found, no scandals exposed. The public gallery doors still open every morning, welcoming tourists, students, school children. They walk through, admiring fragments of history, never suspecting the hunger beneath the marble floors. The institution continues. It always has. My experience, my terror, will never make it into the official record. At least, not the public one. But deep down, I've come to believe that's the real curse of being curator. Not the ghost, not the stitched mouths, not even the reflection that writes without me. It's the duty to keep the secrets we inherit, no matter how they rot. We preserve what others can't face. And I fear that's exactly why they chose me. I still hear them, some nights when the museum groans with settling stone. My name whispered by 100 muffled voices. Sometimes I walk past the curator's wing, locked now, supposedly for renovations, and feel the pull behind the door. The air leaks out like a slow breath, carrying the faintest smell of formaldehyde and old ink. And the glass case still holds that coat. The placard still bears my name. No one else notices it. I asked once, pointed it out to a fellow staff member, and he squinted at empty glass. He said I was imagining things. Maybe he's right. Maybe it's just my exhaustion, my guilt, my fear twisting reality. But then last week, as I finished cataloging a new donation, I opened a fresh ledger. The first page was already written in. My handwriting, the date now the past, but tomorrow. I closed the book and shoved it back in the drawer, heart hammering. I don't know what it means yet, but I know this much. Whatever waits in that wing isn't finished with me. And some nights, when I pass by reflective glass, I see my reflection's lips move, not smiling anymore, whispering something I still can't hear. Not yet. They say every curator is a guardian of memory, that our role is to preserve fragments of human history against the erosion of time. That was what drew me to the profession, an almost sacred duty to protect truth. But truth, I've learned, doesn't like being caged. It festers, it demands, and sometimes it rewrites the hand that tries to hold it. On my first night, I thought the danger was outside the glass cases, that the real threat lived in thieves, decay, or neglect. Now I understand the horror is quieter, more patient. It lives in the records we can't close, in the names that refuse to stay buried, in the reflections that learn how to look back. I've tried to tell myself it was exhaustion, paranoia, a trick of dim light. But no explanation silences the scratching I still hear, late at night, when every shadow feels like it's waiting to be archived. And here's the part that haunts me most. I know I'm not alone. Every museum, every library, every archive carries its ghosts. Pages missing from a ledger, labels that don't match, an artifact that feels heavier than it should. Maybe you've noticed too, while standing in front of a glass case, how your reflection lingers just a second too long. That's the curse of my profession. To preserve the past is to invite it to remain, and some histories refuse to stay still. My first night as a curator never ended. It only followed me home. And if you ever find yourself alone in a museum after dark, staring into the polished glass, don't look too closely, because something might already be writing your name.